but there's also the India-Pakistan. You see, for the longest time, Aisha Siddiqa, it was the India-Pakistan diplomatic war, military wars that seemed to hold back this region from actually integrating or finding some kind of a common economic market or some interconnectedness. Now we've reached a stage where there seems to be a frozen turbulence between these two large countries at the moment. Should that worry us or not? India simply seems to have decided we can't do business anymore with Pakistan because we do not trust Pakistan. The trust deficit is so deep with Pakistan that in a way prevents us from actually even thinking of any kind of South Asian neighborhood or neighborliness.
Raj, the thing is that there are, two dimensions of the issue. And I think that you're looking at it just from one. Of course, there is a trust deficit between India and Pakistan, and it's at both ends. Not that India doesn't trust Pakistan, Pakistan doesn't trust India either. And the problem is not just about the unresolved dispute, the Kashmir issue, etc. The problem is much more. I mean, here you have a regime for the, which has been there, for more than 2 elections, which does operations inside Pakistan as well, inside other countries as well, and then comes and boasts about it and says, ghus ke mara, we entered and we killed. I mean, it owns up to terror attacks as well. This is a problem. And I'm not saying that this kind of operations did not happen before.
Yeah, but I didn't want. But there is cross-border terror. I mean, how does India then, every time there is this approach, India seems at one level to worry about Pakistan only through now the prism of cross-border terrorism. You end terror, and maybe then things you can build from there.
You see, but there is no conversation happening. There is no conversation happening. There is no back channel happening. And unless you talk, I mean, even if Pakistan is a very naughty neighbor and not behaving itself, the Pakistan's perspective is that, India is also doing similar things, and the government in Delhi is boasting about it. It's not that it's hiding it as it was done in the past. It's boasting about it. So where do you have the conversation? So that conversation is not going anywhere, and I don't see a conversation moving. However, what gives me a bit of kind of peace of mind is that certain agreements, like the agreement on the on the line of control, it continues to be followed by both countries. So in one respect, there is this silent, but a stable instability or unstable stability, which you have between the two countries, which is good enough for the moment. But how to move the conversation, how to move the relation to a second phase where we start talking trade. Now, the problem is at both ends. I mean, of course, there is a problem in Pakistan as well, with its politics so unstable at the moment. I don't think that either trade with India or peace with India is something on which Islamabad can move forward.
Okay, I'm trying to get my guests to be short. I know these are complex issues, and therefore you need to expound on them in greater detail. But KC Singh, how do you see this, therefore? Is the whole idea of South Asia regional cooperation dead? Every time, all you can now do is have stronger bilateral relationships in the neighborhood, find ways in which you work with people, build economic relationships with specific countries. The SARC concept is over. In such a turbulent neighborhood, it's going to be impossible. We can do it on TV, but we can't do it institutionally. Our diplomats simply can't sit around a table anymore. Our leaders cannot sit around a table anymore.
When SARC was created, I was in Rashtrapati Bhavan. Gyani Zail Singh, as you know, was the president. And Cable Singh was the former foreign secretary. He came to meet him. And Gyani asked him, he says, what is this SARC? When you are the sarpanch of the village, you don't want a panchayat, because they'll all gang up against you. I mean, that was common sense, that it's going to be very difficult dealing with the neighborhood. even when SAARC was created. Listen, the neighborhood will always have variations because each country is not going to be on the same level or on the same thing where you can deal with them at the same time. Now, take Nepal. When he used to be the king of Nepal was there, we had difficulties with him. In Dhaka, this is not the first time we're having difficulties. We had military rule. General Ziaur Rahman came in and he tilted away from India. They were working with Jamaat-e-Islami, and we had all kinds of difficulties with Bangladesh. So you will have these ups and downs in the neighborhood. Even the Americans are not always able to control all their allies, all the way they want. See what happened in Iran. Once Shah of Iran went, even till today, the relationship between America and Iran is not normal. Because when you're that close to an authoritarian leader and the leader falls, then you inherit all his difficulties. And I think that's what we are facing. So the lessons are that do not align that closely for such a long time with somebody becoming that authoritarian, or control him, or give them advice that this is not the route. Or you...
No, I think you make a very good point, Jayan Pereira. Even in Sri Lanka, there was a feeling for a while that we had hitched our bandwagon onto the Rajapakshas. And then when they were out of the scene, it took some time to get the relationship back on an even keel with Sri Lanka. But I want to explore with you and start with you the China factor, because that really is the other power play that's going on. There's a sense that China wants to expand its influence from the Maldives to Lanka to Bangladesh to parts. Is that a factor at all in the turbulence that we see around us? Or is this all purely internal? All the turbulence is internal unrest in each of these countries.
I mean, in my view, India followed the neighborhood first policy very well in Sri Lanka. During our worst period, when we had the economic collapse, when there was a shortage of everything, it was India that stepped in and supported us in a way we never imagined. And I think, I mean, Sri Lankans are very grateful for that. Of course, at the same time, we do remember how in the 1980s, India promoted the Tamil insurrection also. That is also there in our minds. But what India did during the period of the economic collapse is something we are very much appreciative of. And I think that this thought about China, I think the fear of China is maybe exaggerated, because Sri Lankans go to China because China offers money very cheaply. But that money has been misused by our governments, because they take most of it and build some useless infrastructure projects. Now that is all, we see that problem. And I think that the Rajapaksas actually were closer to China than to India. India stepped in and helped us, and now we have a government that is not so close to the Chinese, to see the Chinese for what they are, and actually the present president wants very much to promote interconnectivity with India in every way. He's talking about a land bridge, a bridge across the sea.
No, I take your point that India has, in a way, rebuilt bridges with Sri Lanka. Raj Chengappa, the China factor, is that a cause for worry that you've got this big neighbor on our border, and a neighbor which wants to expand its influence across these countries? We know of the Sino-Pakistan linkages, but now it's spreading, many believe, to across the neighborhood. Maldives is another good example of China's increasing sphere of influence. Should that be a cause of worry?
Well, China is already a cause of worry when it comes to our line of actual control. They had intrusions, and our relations are still abnormal, as the term that is used. It's a stalemate out there, and that, of course, is a huge cause of worry. With China, there's also examples. The way they went about doing the BRI, or the Belt and Road Initiative, in terms of setting up and investing in infrastructure projects across the region in a way to replace India as the prime regional power, is something that India should learn from. India should, as he had mentioned in Sri Lanka, as soon as Sri Lanka went into trouble, India extended as much as $4 billion in assistance. That was more than what the IMF had given. So for the first time, as China began to spend big bucks, we began to spend it in terms of helping other countries. Now we need to take a leaf off China's book and actually build interdependencies. We saw what happened in Maldives, for instance, when President Muzu went with an India out policy and his ministers started criticizing us, we just raised the issue of saying boycott Maldives as a tourism spot. Now, as we know, Maldives depends heavily on tourism, and Indians were one of the largest tourist fraternity. The moment we said that, the rhetoric, anti-Indian rhetoric began to come down. That's a negative way of looking. But if you take a positive view, and if you start building, as China did, a lot of interdependencies, and actually cash in on the fact that China created enormous debt. Instead, India has a very benign approach to it. We start connecting with, we actually have to give, if you remember the Gujral doctrine, you were there at that time, we need to give the neighbors more than what we can take and create a win-win, and that's going to make the difference.
Sure, but you know, the perception of India in Bangladesh, for example, Sara, how does the average Bangladeshi view India now? Clearly not from the 1971 prism any longer. There's a completely new generation out there, but how do they see India? Particularly given what you said earlier on the show, that India didn't stand up against what Bangladeshis saw was a repressive regime. Would they support this kind of economic interdependence that Raj Chengappa here spoke of just now?
I think we have to recognize that, you know, their interdependence is not really an option. It's an inevitability, and we need to have it to survive. I mean, given our geographical location and given everything else about Bangladesh, our size, what we produce, how we survive, but we obviously have to be linked to India, and we are in very many ways. And I think you're right to point out to this issue about generations. I think for older generations, including people like me who were very young during the Liberation War, our image of India is very different for many of us. It's definitely a reminder of friendship and connectivity and all of that. But I think for this younger generation that has grown up in the last sort of 15 to 20 years in particular, I think it is quite different, because they see a lot of exceptionalism being made in relation to India. They see a lot of political influence being wielded by India. And I think this, as I said, there's obviously you're talking about political influence. There's obviously massive cultural and social influence, massive integration in that sense, particularly between West Bengal and Bangladesh in terms of our literary and cultural and musical and other heritage. There's a huge amount of interconnection. You can't even think about segregating those things, really. But when it comes down to politics, I think it's a different situation. And people have seen, I think, with tremendous dismay, and that means including people from previous generations, this silence from India. Not only silence, I would go further and say complicity with many of the things that have been happening here that are not conscionable. And I think you said something earlier in the program that, you know, is it time to stand by people, not just identify one individual that you're going to back to the hilt because it works in terms of geopolitical concerns, but think about, you know, what are all of our, maybe it's naive to say this, but, you know, all of our countries have certain foundational principles which are about, you know, equality, solidarity, dignity, dare I say it, human rights, the terms that most of our governments these days are not very happy to use any longer. But I think if we can remember that, then I think we can remember that within this region, we can build real solidarity amongst people. I don't think individual Bangladeshis have hatred for individual Indian people. I think there's a great deal of